I have three close friends, all Gen X men, all over 50. One of them got divorced 6 years ago and hasn't been on a date since. One of them lives alone with a dog and a carefully curated collection of vinyl records, and genuinely seems happier than anyone I know. One of them ghosted his entire friend group for 18 months and came back like nothing happened. From the outside, this looks like three different stories. But when I started paying attention, really paying attention, I realized they were all doing the same thing. Gen X men are pulling away, divorcing and not remarrying, letting friendships go quiet, choosing solitude in numbers that don't match any other generation at the same age. And the strange thing is, most of them aren't unhappy about it. They're not lonely, they're not broken, they're not even particularly conflicted. They're finally doing something they've been training for since they were 7. And once you understand the latchkey wiring, once you see what 2 recessions did to a generation of boys who grew up to be men who never learned to ask for help, the whole picture shifts. Because what looks like a generation of men giving up may actually be a generation of men finally choosing peace. When my friend Dave was 9 years old, he walked home from school, unlocked the front door, and made himself a sandwich. His parents got home at 6:15. This happened every weekday for years. He doesn't tell this story like it's a wound. He tells it like logistics. The key was on a string around his neck. The bread was in the second drawer. The TV was on by 3:20. This was just the arrangement. And that's the first thing you have to understand about many Gen X boys. They didn't experience the empty house as abandonment. To them, it was just Tuesday. They didn't know anyone whose mom was home at 3:15. They didn't expect daily check-ins. They didn't expect constant supervision. For millions of kids growing up in the 1970s and 1980s, independence wasn't a life skill you learned later. It was the environment. Now, of course, not every Gen X boy had the same childhood, but enough of them shared this experience that certain patterns began to emerge. Psychologists have long noted that repeated childhood experiences shape what feels normal to us as adults. And for many Gen X boys, being alone wasn't frightening. It was familiar. Year after year, they came home to empty houses, solved their own problems, entertained themselves, and learned to manage long stretches of time without help. Gradually, a lesson took root. Not because anyone sat them down and taught it. Because life taught it. If something needs to be handled, handle it yourself. If something breaks, figure it out. If you're struggling, keep moving. And beneath all of that was an even deeper message. You are the only resource you can truly count on. That belief became a source of strength. It created resilience. It created self-sufficiency. But it also created habits that many men carried into adulthood. Because when independence becomes your default setting, relying on other people can start to feel unfamiliar, even when help is available. Dave wasn't unusual. Millions of boys his age were living some version of the same story. And maybe that's why so many Gen X men don't fear being alone. Not because they struggle with connection. Not because they're incapable of intimacy. But because independence became their native language long before they were old enough to understand what it might cost. But the latchkey childhood wasn't the whole story. Because childhood taught the lesson. Adulthood reinforced it. Take my friend Marcus. It's 1991. He's 24 years old, degree in hand, ready to start building a life. Then the economy slows. The opportunities he expected aren't there. The entry-level jobs disappear. Instead of launching a career, he spends years piecing together temporary work and trying to gain traction. Like many people his age, he adapts. He lowers his expectations. He learns to rely on himself. Then life moves on. He gets married, buys a house, builds a career. By the mid-2000s, it finally feels like the plan is working. Then, 2008 arrives. The financial crisis hits. Retirement accounts shrink. Companies cut staff. Families across the country suddenly find themselves wondering whether the ground beneath them is as solid as they thought. Marcus doesn't lose everything, but he comes close enough to see how quickly everything can change. And that's important. Because for many Gen X men, the economic shocks of adulthood seem to confirm the lessons they had already learned as children. Nothing is guaranteed. Security can disappear. The systems you're told to trust can fail. Now that doesn't mean every Gen X man responded the same way. Some became more social. Some leaned harder on family and friends. But others moved in a different direction. They became even more self-reliant, even more cautious, even less willing to place their sense of stability in someone else's hands. Dave experienced one recession at the beginning of his adult life and never fully stopped questioning the promises institutions made. Marcus lived through another at the height of his responsibilities and became more careful about what and who he depended on. And my third friend, the one who disappeared for 18 months and then returned as if nothing had happened. He lived through both recessions, both moments when the floor seemed to shift beneath an entire generation. And over time, he arrived at a philosophy he would probably never say out loud. If you need less from the world can disappoint you less. 3 men, different lives, different choices, but all shaped by the same underlying lesson. When self-reliance keeps getting rewarded, solitude can start to feel safer than dependence. Dave got divorced 6 years ago. It was amicable. No affair. No dramatic betrayal. No explosion that tore 2 lives apart. They still talk. They still respect each other. But since the divorce, he hasn't been on a single date. Not one. Marcus has friends. Lots of them. He's funny, reliable, the kind of guy who remembers birthdays and shows up when someone needs help. But there's a strange contradiction. Almost nobody knows what's really going on inside his head. Not because he's hiding some dramatic secret. There is no scandal. No double life. No crisis he's desperately trying to conceal. The truth is much simpler. Marcus rarely tells anyone what he needs. And after decades of living that way, it has become automatic. For many Gen X men, self-reliance wasn't just encouraged, it became part of their identity. Over time, asking for help can start to feel unfamiliar. Not wrong, just unnatural. So when life gets difficult, they don't reach out. They handle it. Or at least they appear to. From the outside, Marcus looks fine. Successful career. Good relationships. Active social life. But sometimes a person can be surrounded by people and still carry most of his burdens alone. And then there's my third friend. The one who disappeared. No calls, no texts, no explanation. For 18 months, nobody knew what had happened. His friends worried. Some assumed he was depressed. Others assumed he was angry. When he finally came back, he wasn't defensive or apologetic. He simply said something that stuck with me. I needed to not be needed. That sentence explained more than he realized. Because he wasn't rejecting his friends. He wasn't ending the relationships. He was retreating from the constant expectation to be available, responsive, and emotionally present. For some men, especially those who spent a lifetime solving problems alone, withdrawal doesn't feel like abandonment. It feels like recovery. A chance to reset. A chance to hear themselves think. The problem is that everyone else experiences it differently. His friends saw silence. He saw maintenance. They thought he had left. He thought he would come back when he was ready. And maybe that's the hidden challenge beneath all of this. Not that these men don't care, but that they've spent so much of their lives carrying things alone that they sometimes forget other people can't see the difference between needing space and disappearing. So why do so many Gen X men choose to be alone? Maybe it's not because they gave up on people. Maybe it's because they spent a lifetime learning how to survive without them. What looks from the outside like withdrawal may not be loneliness at all. It may be a form of peace, a hard-earned comfort with their own company, a confidence that they can stand on their own if they have to. Of course, not every Gen X man is the same. Many are happily married, deeply connected, and surrounded by people they love. But for those who choose more solitude, the story is often more complicated than people assume. They're not necessarily running away from connection. They're living according to lessons learned decades ago. Lessons about self-reliance. Lessons about resilience. Lessons that helped them survive. And maybe the real question isn't why Gen X men are comfortable being alone. Maybe it's whether the rest of us have mistaken solitude for suffering. Because sometimes the man sitting quietly by himself isn't waiting to be rescued. Sometimes he's finally at peace.